Thank you for everyone for coming to the right Kubernetes talk at this time. Josh and I frequently have this problem where we're up against this thing called Kubernetes all the time, and we're
Wait, there's a Kubernetes talk right now?
Yeah.
Hi, see ya.
See ya. So to get on with some disclaimers really quick. Disclaimer, everybody here I'm sure has sat through some kind of mentoring talk. If you're here today, that means it's probably important to you in some way. Things that we're not going to talk about today, because again, this is not your average mentoring talk, but some things that we're going to talk about today, not talk about today, are things like the importance of mentoring, right? Again, you all care about it, you're here. We're not going to talk about the benefits or even how to be a good mentor or mentee. We're really going to hone in on a few things today. Instead, we're going to be talking about the approaches, the techniques, the hot takes, you're in for a good ride, that we've used to tackle the problem of scaling mentoring in open source large-scale projects like Kubernetes. And again, scaling. So you might hear the terms like one-on-one and it doesn't work for us. That doesn't necessarily mean that we don't agree with some of the approaches that we're talking against. It just means from a scale perspective, in the case of Kubernetes with like 40,000 contributors, you might need to scale like hundreds fast, right? So when we say mentoring in Kubernetes, what does that mean to us? That means that we have key roles that we have to fill, most notably member to owner. And I wanted to show this before we really even got into the weeds, because it's important about the terminology that we're going to use today. So in this case, member means you're a part of our GitHub org, and then all the way up to owner means that you are probably in the root owner file. You're merging, approving, doing design work, et cetera. So this is considered our contributor ladder. We have thousands of people who are non-members, and then as the pipeline goes up the hill there to owner, we obviously have only a few hundred owners from a funnel perspective. So we obviously need more people at the top. I'm sure you all need more people at the top wherever you are too. That means people reviewing things. It means people helping you with roadmaps, helping you execute whatever it is. I'm sure you need more people to go up your chain. This is really a chain of trust for us. And as it is in any open source project, really, again, getting maintainership is really about building trust that you're going to take care of the thing and help see it through forward and have it keep innovating. So you'll note the words sponsored, authored, leadership, et cetera, when we talk about like chains of trust. So, with that, let me introduce my co-presenter, Josh Berkus, the illustrious Josh. Many of you might know Josh from his work here at Scale, the container track chair, and also PostgreSQL days. Josh is the literal most interesting man on the project in Kubernetes. I promise, sit down with Josh, have a meal, and you'll hear all kinds of stories. Of course, Josh also works at Red Hat in Red Hat's OSPO, holding down open source there.
Cool. And this is Paris, who helped create the Contributor Experience SIG, co-founded the Contributor Experience SIG for Kubernetes. I think you recently stepped down as chair, yeah?
Yeah.
Recently stepped down as chair, is still the head of the mentoring sub-project for Contributor Experience. She and I are collaborating on contributor strategy for the CNCF. And she also, in her spare time, does open source strategy things for Google. And as I recently found out in a trip to down to Sunnyvale, San Jose, is really enthusiastic about mini golf. So now, let me actually ask, first I'm going to ask you a question, but I'm going to actually ask you a preview to this question, because I want to get an idea of why people are here. I know some of you, but I don't know all of you. So how many people here are some form of open source project leadership? Okay. How many people have worked on some kind of mentoring program, either within your project, Google Summer of Code, Outreachy, something else? Okay. How many people are in a dev role or community management role in your jobs? Okay, yeah. This is the big thing. Okay. So now I'm going to ask you the question that has to do with our content here, which is, and just shout this out loud, what is the single hardest part of running a mentoring program? What is the thing that you have to do to run a mentoring program that is overall your blocker and may in fact cause the mentoring program to not happen?
Quality mentors.
User involvement. You can't put in the participants to actually follow through.
Yeah. Cool. Yep. Actually, those are all definitely hard parts. I'm going to focus on, actually, our first response, which was finding mentors, right? That when I have been unable to make a mentoring program happen, it has been because no mentors are available. It's never because no mentees are available, because it turns out that if your project has any adoption at all, heck, if you can even build programming skills for it, even though the actual software is not popular, there are people out there who are interested in learning how to contribute. But finding mentors is hard. So then the question is, why is finding mentors hard? Again, call it out. Why is it so hard to find qualified mentors to do mentoring, right? We said it before at the beginning. We've actually found that everybody understands that in open source mentoring is important, right? I mean, you do run into some people who don't care. But by and large, if you asked any 10 open source maintainers, 7 or 8 of them would say, yes, mentoring is very important. So if that's overwhelmingly true, why don't more people mentor?
They're too busy doing everything.
Yep, exactly. It's the time problem. And this is a really hard one. And don't have to take my word for it. We did 2 surveys of Kubernetes contributors that included questions about participation in mentoring programs, and asked people who were at, levels of established contributorship why, if you didn't mentor, why you didn't mentor. And in both surveys, number one reason, which is this teal bar in the middle, was not enough time in the week, ahead of not enough knowledge, which is actually the red one. We're actually going to talk about that one later on, too. But not enough time in the week. And, reason for this is simple, right? Your best mentors are already the busiest people in your project because they know the most and because they're the most in demand, but therefore they also have the least amount of time. So we have 2 problems, right? So we need to solve our not enough mentors problem. In order to solve our not enough mentors problem, we need to solve the time problem. Now, I'm going to criticize something here, which is how most projects do mentoring today. And this is wrong. It is not the solution. And I know it is not the solution because I tried to do it for 15 years and it didn't work. This is what we call informal one-on-one mentoring. And it doesn't work because it doesn't solve the time problem, and as a matter of fact, it makes the time problem worse because you are forcing your biggest contributors to make a choice between mentoring and contributing. Now, let me get specific here what I mean by informal one-on-one mentoring. Informal one-on-one mentoring is a program where you don't have any specific goals or specific time limits. You don't really have structured tasks. You don't have graduation requirements. You just have, hey, this person wants to contribute. Will you please mentor them? And it is how almost every single open source project starts out doing mentoring. Now, which is the reason why everybody starts out this way is that when your project is really small, like 4 maintainers, no users in production, a handful of general contributors, etc. When a project is really small, it is really the only thing you can do. You don't have the infrastructure. You don't have anybody managing contributor experience to actually help set up another program, that sort of thing. You don't have, so that is pretty much what you do. And it's probably kind of appropriate for a project of that size. It's kind of like if you need to go across a creek between two meadows, a wooden footbridge is perfectly appropriate. As a matter of fact, building anything more elaborate would be a waste of time. But something really changes as your project gets bigger. Now let me talk about what happens as your project gets bigger. So now a lot of people, when they're looking at the project getting bigger, they kind of focus on things like code base size, right? But the thing is, the code bases, particularly now that we all understand that deleting code is as important as writing code, the code bases don't actually generally grow that fast. Not that much faster than the number of regular contributors, the number of maintainers that you have. That's not really the location of the problem. What grows really fast is once your project crosses that barrier from being experimental to being useful, your number of users and your number of people who want to become contributors, who are drive-through contributors, who are casual contributors, starts to grow really fast, and a lot faster than your number of maintainers grows. And the thing is, interactions within your project operate as the square of the number of people involved in the project. So your number of issues and your number of pull requests rockets upwards, whereas the number of your maintainers is just growing linearly, generally with the number of project sponsors. So at this point, without even adding a mentoring program, your maintainers are already panicked about their lack of time. And if you get to this point, you are already in big trouble. This is the Minneapolis bridge that collapsed because, they let it keep getting more and more traffic. They kept routing more and more traffic to it over years without ever reevaluating the load on the bridge, and they found out what the actual real load on the bridge was because they exceeded it. And I've seen projects go through this, and it is not any fun at all. You will get nothing done in your project for a year because everything will shut down, and hopefully it won't be permanent. So in order to solve the mentorship program, we need to solve the time program, the time problem, as part of mentorship, right? Is we cannot have a system of mentorship that makes our maintainers' time problem worse. So now, before I moved over to doing mostly community management, I was doing mostly engineering, particularly worked on database technology for a long time. And one of the things is, how many people here are also programmers? Yeah, just about everybody, right? So if you have a piece of software that's, say, processing data, and it is pegged at 100% CPU, and it's still not processing data fast enough, what do you do with that? We've got a whole ton of programmers in the room. What do you do next?
Throw more at the problem.
Throw more what? Right, if you want to make a late project even later. No, what you do is you throw more processes at the problem, right? On a single machine, if you're pegged at 100% CPU and one CPU, then what you need to use is more CPUs. And if one machine is oversaturated, what you need is more machines, right? This is the whole cloud thing, Hey, we want to scale out and not just try to scale up. And so we need to do the same thing with mentoring, right? Make it more parallel and make each mentoring step more efficient.
So, make it a system, not about the person. This is something that I have heard growing up in the technology. Don't make it about a person, make it about a system. So some of the system characteristics that we looked at for building Kubernetes mentoring programs, I'm about to take you through right now. And it's very similar to what you would do with a system. When the system has a problem, you gather requirements, you identify the issues, things like that. You make it an engineering problem, not, a community manager problem, if you will. So the first one, of course, is don't build for what you think you need, right? In this case, the traditional one-on-one approach, right? You fill out a form, you get matched with someone, the end, or in the Josh example of the 4 maintainers, or one of the 4 maintainers grows with you. So most folks are actually launching mentoring programs without really thinking about the how and the who. And in this case, the personas of the contributors that you have in the program. So for instance, do you have doc contributors? Do you have Golang contributors? Do you have juniors? Do you have vets in open source? All of them have and need some kind of different mentoring to get either to the next level or just in general for what they're doing in life. So are you really listening to what they need? Are you asking? And have you really asked why they need a mentor? When I first came on board in Kubernetes, I asked a lot of folks this question. I was hearing this a lot. Oh, I need a mentor. I need a mentor. And come to find out, a lot of that was because some of the onboarding programs that we have weren't documented in the contributor guide. And the developer guide wasn't necessarily wonderful in order to get ramped up with, installs and things like that. So tackling that was actually a big undertaking for us as part of the mentorship program. In a previous slide, Josh actually showed you the mentor blocker survey, and he said that the second largest was not knowing enough. And this, again, is an issue with a lot of mentoring programs where you're bottling up the mentors at the highest level. And when you have, junior folks that can actually help other junior folks, for instance. So engaging everyone here is actually a key thing and a key system characteristic. We have to learn together, and really helps with building a culture that's okay to ask questions in public because everybody's asking questions and everybody's answering questions. One of the programs that we've created that really embodies this engage everyone tactic is our monthly YouTube series called Meet Our Contributors. This is a DIY screenshot of one of the very first ones that we did, and we just five contributors just kind of hopped on a Zoom call. George in the middle there live streamed it for us on YouTube, and we had people just asking us questions from kind of every medium. And this has really helped us because you can think of it sort of as like an office hours, a mentors on demand, if you will. And we've had a lot of fun answering a lot of questions. For instance, they go from how'd you get involved in Kubernetes? What SIG do I join? Why are my tests flaking? Can you review my PR? How do I become a better code reviewer? All of those we've answered live, and they're all recorded, and we're attempting to index them now. We've done 30 episodes so far, and this is one of our most recent. You can see we're a little less DIY at this point, but you can see like the questions that are floating from Slack, and people on the line kind of helping you and walk you through that. Compared to one-on-one, we would have needed 500 more mentors, so throwing out some math for the people that we have helped out through this program, and we've only had 40 mentors on. So 40 people, we've helped out thousands. One of our code base walkthroughs that we did on Meet Our Contributors actually has over 3,000 views on YouTube right now. So that's really helping people out at scale. It's getting people onboarded, it's getting questions asked in a rapid way, and it really helps out that culture of I don't want to ask a low-level question, if you will. So number 3, obviously clear goals, right? This is something that Josh talked about in the beginning with, what is the issue with one-on-one, and a lot of the time that is the fact that there's no clear goals associated with it. And honestly, this seems to be a desire for everyone, right? Not necessarily in open source, but I'm sure everybody here wants clear goals at your job. You want clear goals as to what it means to be, a senior engineer when you're a mid-level engineer. This is a kind of across-the-board thing. But not having clear goals with defined ends is really what a lot of a stump is in mentoring programs. We really don't have any time for ambiguity, and in Kubernetes, one of the very first things for us to get clear goals was establishing that contributor ladder that we showed you in the beginning. The contributor ladder is actually, we think, your first kind of P0 into establishing mentor programs. Why? Because it defines what the roles are. They clearly have steps on how to get there. And remember, those steps are more like trust steps. So when we say things like 20 code reviews to be a code reviewer, for instance, it is a little bit of an arbitrary number, but it's 20 because we're saying, okay, on your way to that 20, you'll probably have open dialogue from us, and we'll probably already know, because if you're at 20 code reviews, you're probably in our face. And we see you every day, right? Again, that building of the trust and building programs around that trust. So one of the programs that we actually are in development right now with having clear goals in a scalable way is group mentoring. And what we mean by group mentoring is taking groups of people, so in our case we take 10, and 10 of these people are all on the same level right now. So again, going back to this contributor ladder, so you have 10 members, and they're all in SIG API machinery, and in Kubernetes, SIG means special interest group, that's who owns the code for again, like the API. 10 people, all members in API machinery, and they all want, and we need more reviewers in API machinery. So we'll take 3 mentors, so 3 maintainers, to their 10, put them in a private Slack room, have weekly Slack stand-ups, and then it becomes more of a peer mentoring activity than it actually becomes a one-on-one mentoring activity. And in that space, you're getting a lot of camaraderie, you're building each other up together, and you're learning together, and you're going on a learning journey together, right? And then the most important part of this is that there is a sort of a time-bounded thing to it. So according to our contributor ladder, in order to get to, say, reviewer or approver, you have to be with a project. We've spelled it out. I think it's like 3 months. And so in this case of group mentoring, you have 3 months with 10 people to make it to a reviewer. That's pretty clear guidelines. And while you do that, you're getting coached and doing stand-ups from maintainers who are doing the job now. So if one-on-one, though, still sounds better for you, there is a way to still get clear goals with one-on-one at a scalable pace, right? One of those ways that we found is called the one-on-one hour. What this means is there are certain tasks that you still need on a one-on-one basis, right? You're like, okay, Paris, we can do all the AMAs we want, but I still need a human, right? That human that you're, in this case, I'm sorry, mentor. In this case, the mentor has 5 things that they can do with you, because those 5 things have clear goals. So they can like pair program with you, they can do an AMA, they can do a code review session, and we figured out all 5 of those things, listening activities, and from what the project needs. So we've determined those activities, and we've said, okay, you have 1 mentor, 1 mentee, 1 hour. And then we'll match folks based on that information, right? So again, there's no ambiguous end. You have clear goals, clear time frame, et cetera. And if there is something natural that sparks between the relationship, if somebody says, oh, hey, no, you could, I could definitely see you being a maintainer here, let's do something more regular, then it'll spark naturally, and it's not, being forced to be matched with someone for X time period. So you can see from just the examples that I've provided so far that multiple approaches is actually the way to go. That was one of our system characteristics. People have different learning styles. There's different strokes for different folks. I'm sure everybody in here learns differently. I know I like being in a classroom setting, for instance. It makes me accountable. I'm not surfing on Twitter. And other people, though, especially open source maintainers, maintainers love contributor guides. They like to read, just give me a checklist. Other people like to watch videos. Dr. Anita Sharma at Oregon State University really opened my eyes to this because she's working on a lot of open source research right now, especially with underrepresented folks, and making the ties there that maybe we're not being inclusive because we only have our contributor guide written verbally buried in the root of a community folder. So we've taken that approach and built programs around those different personas and different approaches, different learning styles, and even different locations. We've realized that we're in person sometimes during these big 12,000 KubeCon conferences. Why can't we do in-person things there, similar to like OpenStack's Upstream Institute? Things that fill those voids that we wouldn't necessarily have thought about before. So here's sort of our different approaches. We have remote approaches, we have in-person approaches, we have video instructional approaches, we have interpersonal approaches, all of which we've just talked about. And then, of course, we have stuff that's documented, which really brings me to the next point. Is it repeatable? We have, as community managers, we say, okay, well, we're running this program, or, oh, I'm coordinating this program. But are you the only one that's coordinating that program? How is that going to be sustainable? Is it documented? Can others do it without you? That's really the key thing here.
Oh, wait, I don't need that. I need the other thing. Thank you. So, given that, let's talk about succession. Not just succession and mentorship, but project succession in general. How many people here work on an open source project that has a succession problem or a potential succession problem? That you have like important things that have a bus factor of 1? How many people don't know that they're on an open source project that has a succession problem? This is a problem throughout the world of open source in general. People have written huge polemics about it, and it's a very common thing. And we ran into this in Kubernetes early on. So from the early days of Kubernetes, from the 1.0 release, we had this terrific release team of people who packaged up all of the stuff, created the sample operating system packages, created the testable images, etc., ran through all of the release tests, everything else to actually get a version of Kubernetes out the door, starting with the 1.0 release. However, there was a problem with this, which is each one of these great people had their one thing that they did for the release, and no one else knew how to do that thing, and no one else had the security access to do that particular thing. And this is a real problem, not just for the project, but for them personally, right? Because if only you can build, say, the operating system packages for the release, then if you're on vacation, we can't do a release, which means either, as actually happened with one of the Kubernetes releases, we literally delayed a release because somebody was on vacation, or you can't go on vacation. And either way is pretty terrible. On top of which, it also has a compounding problem, which is, as the person who best knows how to do that particular step, you are also the only person with the knowledge on how to change or automate that step. But you never have any time to work on the automation because you're always doing the work. So it becomes a trap, and people burn out because of this, and projects get into trouble because of this. Again, we're at the time problem. So if you have a group of people, all of whom are essential for some task in your project, all of whom are working full-time on that individual task, and yet you need them to train other people in how to do that task, how do you do it? They don't have any free time. Well, one of the things that the world of open source doesn't do frequently enough is look at how other industries solve these problems. And it turns out that a lot of other industries have looked at how to solve these problems before, particularly union trades. The way that it works, if you're in a union trade, if you're a machinist or an electrician or a plumber or whatever, is that Somebody goes through the training, they become officially an apprentice under the union, and then you're assigned to a master, and you will work for that master at a reduced rate of pay, doing the work that the master needs to be done, and in return, they will show you how to do the work. So from the perspective of the master, because keep in mind, we are not looking at optimize the apprentice's time. We're looking at optimizing the master's time because that is our constrained resource. And so with the apprentice doing the work that the master would have had to do anyway, that gives them more time to mentor. So what we did, and by we actually, I came along in the middle of this process. This was mainly done by started by Jace and Enoch. What is Enoch's real name? Anthony. Thank you, Anthony. So by Jason and Anthony to do this for the release team, because we'd had this critical fail and everybody realized that was a problem to be solved. So they started out by actually giving names to all of the roles that people were performing. These roles already existed, in fact, right? There were already people doing specific things. We just hadn't given a name and a title to it. So we gave a name and a title to all of these things and said, okay, this person's doing this person's building the docs, this person is in charge of testing, this person is in charge of making sure that it's possible to upgrade, and all of that. And so then once you have these roles, what you do is you have them just hammer out a quick description of the role. What is it I actually do, and like a sort of loose checklist of the things that I do. Something that takes an hour and a half to hammer out, right? Initially it's going to be very sketchy. Now, our role handbooks have at this point grown to multi-page documents with a lot of resources and that sort of thing, but it didn't start out that way, right? That's what you develop over time. And even 3 paragraphs, you'll find, is vastly more information than you had about what people were doing before. And what it does is it allows you to get started with something else, which is you add a system of apprentices. We call these shadows in some of the programs. There's another one where they're actually called, what are they called in release engineering? I don't know. Anyway, there are different names for these. But we call these shadows in the release team. And so we did a release where every role now had an assigned shadow. And the way that the shadow works is, you know, if I'm the lead for CI Signal, and one of the things you have to do in CI Signal is somebody has to, every morning and every evening, somebody has to look at our test grid and see where the new failures are and make sure that the people who is responsible for that code pay attention to it promptly. Well, that's a manpower-intensive task, and it is perfect for assigning to apprentices. And in that course, they get to understand the tests, you know, what tests are running and how those tests tend to fail. They get to meet all of the people in the project. They get to know who's responsive and who's not responsive and how to reach people in the various media, which are all important things. And they're doing work that otherwise the role lead would have had to do. So they are freeing up the role lead's time so that he or she can spend that time showing them how to do things correctly. This has been actually a tremendously successful program. Let me actually show you via one person how well this worked in terms of ratcheting people up the contributor ladder. So this was the 1.11 release where I was the release lead. And my CI Signal person was, I recruited somebody from Google Quality Engineering, who's very talented, Aish. And Aish took on the role of CI Signal. And in the next release, Aish went up to be the shadow for overall release lead. And, you know, to learn how to manage all of the different parts, how to coordinate all of the different people. And that meant in the next release, she moved to being release lead herself. And in the meantime, I came back to do CI Signal, because actually I hadn't done CI Signal before. So not only this, you know, it gives you a re-entrant. One of the other problems with a lack of defined succession is it means that people can't leave even temporarily, right? As in, if I'm a project leader and I need to take some time off, I don't want to do it because there is no way for me to come back. Whereas with this mechanism, I can always come back. I can always rejoin the release team whenever I feel like it. So this has been our most attractive program for recruiting new contributors. We're branching it out here, and it's because it is so comfortable for a new contributor because they know what they have to do, when they have to do it, and what will happen when they do it. So let me go over again in the terms of how to design a mentoring program, why this is successful, right? So in this case, mentorship is not a separate activity. It is part of the process of producing the release. It requires no extra time from mentors, or minimal extra time. It's structured with goals, tasks, and graduation. We have a defined time limit, which is a single release cycle, and the constant repetition and cycling means that documentation gets constantly improved, processes get constantly improved, so that the whole process gets better as we go.
And from that inspiration, from this great program that Jace, Josh, Anthony, and so many other people built, we've been inspired to build this elsewhere in the project now. So, for instance, contributor summits. We have a face-to-face team that builds contributor summits at KubeCon. They all have roles, just like here at Scale. For instance, registration, people that are doing the content, CFPs, they all have role books. And then another engineering example is our API review committee. API being probably the most complex thing about Kubernetes. It's kind of the heart, with Node being obviously like the kernel. But the API is very complex, and new contributors a lot of the times want to go immediately to that or to Kubernetes. And the API review committee takes shadows now of not necessarily new contributors, but contributors who have been around a while looking to, again, have mentorship for themselves as well, and gives them that purview into how to review an API for breaking changes, and that helps out the API reviewers too, because they don't have to do any, extra training and things like that, because the shadows are there helping, doing documentation, asking the why questions and things like that. So there's all different ways that you can approach shadowing and apprenticeship and things like that for your projects. Be creative. I think that's the most important part. And also, again, ask questions, especially to yourself. There's things that I asked for my community management role, where I said, how can I take this task and make it a team, and really scale that way. So to review some of the system characteristics: build for personas, engage everyone, have clear goals, multiple approaches, repeatable, because we want you to adopt this. Mentorship is, again, very traditional thought process of, and we think that it doesn't have to be this way. So we've created a lot of documentation around the programs themselves, the processes, and it's important for you to know that you don't need to be a maintainer to build these programs for any open source project that you're involved with. When I first got involved with Kubernetes, I was not a maintainer yet. Obviously, I grew up to one, but this is really letting all of you know that you are empowered to do this as well, and this will actually really help the maintainers too if they see other people that are building programs, for them to get help where their time isn't being stretched thin. That's really the key kind of takeaway here, is building programs that make sense, that have those things like time in play and in consideration. And really, you should build a mentoring program today. Thanks for coming. Any questions?
Yep. So, questions?
I can't think about what you said.
So by the way, one of the other things I want to add is we showed you a whole lot of programs and everything. Keep in mind, all of this, this whole complexity of different mentoring programs, different approaches and stuff, this took us 3 years to build. So don't try to bite it off all at once. Start with one thing, either the biggest pain point you have or the thing that's going to be the easiest to implement. and do that. Because not only will that allow you to make some progress right away, but also it'll build credibility that new approaches to mentorship are useful.
How much of the requirements do you put on the mentee versus the mentor? That tends to be what is, I don't want to say detrimental, but what most mentors feel on top of the time constraint is, I don't know what they want to learn. How do I know what they want to do? Or,
right.
I want to learn programming. Cool, what programming? What language? Where do you want to go? How do I do DevOps?
And that's why we don't subscribe to programs like that. I mean, that's why I feel like it's subscribing to like the free-for-all, like come grab a mentor, ask for a mentor, like isn't scalable. Like
right.
so that's why we've said, here's the mentoring programs we have to the mentees, and you serve those, like that, because that's what we have and that's what's available. Because anytime you get into these situations like that, like, and that's where I said, and that's in the beginning too, when I was like, listen and find out what exactly it is they need, because I was hearing a lot of that too, especially when I first started. It was, oh yeah, no, I want a mentor for Go. And then I'm like, okay, well, there's a ton of Go resources online. Like we are, this is an open source project. We can't necessarily teach you Go. We'll teach you how to contribute. We'll teach you the internals of Kubernetes. There's only so many things that we can do, and I think having that expectation drawn out for both mentees and mentors, and we do have like expectation documents. Again, more documentation. We have so much documentation, y'all. I swear, it's just like Kubernetes/community. Take all the documentation you ever need.
And in terms of expectations, in terms of mentee versus mentor, like for the shadow program for the release team, we actually have exit interviews for both mentors and mentees. And we look for problems on both sides, because you have problems on both sides, right? You have mentees who just disappeared, but never officially dropped out of the program. I mean, these days we actually have several shadows for each position, partly because we have so many people wanting to participate, and second, because we find that about half of them drop out before the release, because they just, no matter how much it's documented what the time commitment is, people don't necessarily understand what that means for their personal schedule. And then we also have mentors who are, end up being uncommunicative, end up not providing enough instruction, end up just not making use of their mentees. And so then we cycle for that, talk to people. Sometimes, I remember one case we ended up catapulting a mentee directly to a leadership position because her mentor went completely AWOL. She basically took over the position and improved it in the process. So we also provide an opportunity for people to shine. It's a two-way thing, right? The mentor is expected to do certain things, the mentee is expected to do certain things, and you need to look at both sides.
Where do your, and maybe you've already covered this, but where do your mentors go after they finish the mentoring program? Like, what is sort of the next step for them usually?
Putting themselves into an owner's file.
Yeah.
So like in the case of group mentoring, like, at the end of 3 months, we've had consistent feedback loops with you, because again, it's sort of like I don't want to say class, it's not a class, right? But it sort of feels that way, because you have a 3-month period to complete it, like you have 20 things to do. But anyway, at the end, your goal then is to PR yourself into an owner's file. And then you've made your path or whatever, or your first PR.
Except that if you are an owner, we're going to touch on you to participate in mentoring programs pretty much forever. So but it is one of the steps of getting from reviewer to owner is, hey, if you're a reviewer, we expect you to mentor some people, because once you're an owner, we really expect you to recruit additional reviewers. So we have to know that you can do it. And
that's actually written in our contributor guide as well. Under, I think it's like approver, one of the bullets is mentoring.
Yeah.
So it's just this consistent cycle, if you will. Back to you really quick. I just wanted to address something. That's why we started Meet Our Contributors. That was why. It's because I was getting these just like really random, like I need a mentor for this really random thing, and that's why it's just like we only have so much time, right? And like again, going back to expectations. So I was like really curious, like let's just have office hours and see, like I'll say I'm a mentor, ask me a question. And I want to see what kinds of questions they were asking. And we had 2 or 3 sessions and realized that a lot of people were asking the same questions. So how can we build what we need and what they need, you know, together? And that's kind of what the programs that we have now with like the shadow programs and group mentoring and things like that. And then also like including those things on our contributor guide was really helpful as well. So like in the case of Kubernetes being built with Go and people needing Go mentorship, we have like a page that says like here's where you can go for Go help. Instead of just leaving them hanging, for instance, or like, hey, go to, you know, this channel for Go help or something along those lines where it like closes that loop for them, so they're not coming to us with very ambiguous questions that like we necessarily can't solve that moment.
So any more questions?
It's like how well do you think these systems apply to just like large corporations not doing open source stuff, so kind of complete opposites?
So, I mean, I think that a lot of these could be used internally at companies. One of our previous times we gave this talk, one of the people who was attending specifically because her job was to revamp her corporate mentorship programs inside the company. Because the problems really aren't different, right? Your most knowledgeable people in the company are also the ones with the least free time. And getting them to mentor is hard because you're begging favors from them. And now, the problem you're up against in a company is that if you want to implement these things, you need buy-in. I mean, it's actually true in an open source project too, right? You need buy-in from the leadership. They don't necessarily have to do it, but they have to agree that it's worth doing. Because ultimately what needs to happen is you have to say, hey, if you're a distinguished engineer for our company, then it's expected you're going to spend 10% of your time on mentoring, right? That needs to go into people's job goals if it's going to happen. Because if people have to make a decision between the thing that they know is the right thing to do and the thing that their boss who approves their annual bonus wants them to do, the boss is going to win most of the time. Some of them are more appropriate than others, right? I mean, not very many companies are going to be up for an open meet our contributors approach, et cetera, even internally. I mean, some of them should, but, you know, interdepartmental rivalries and all those other things really become a problem for that. But things like apprenticeship programs, like I say, the apprenticeship programs came from industry, right? It's not originally an open source thing at all. And if you go into factories and other things, you'll find that is in fact how they train people. So it's completely applicable. And for that matter, things like the one-on-one hour would actually be a really good program for internal because, again, people's time is scarce, but you say, hey, we're going to put a meeting on Friday for you that's going to last 1 hour where you're going to mentor a junior engineer. And you could completely get management buy-in for that.
The group mentoring, too, actually came from like many moons ago when I worked at Comcast and trying to staff call centers and trying to scale up like 50-plus people, you know, into these Tier 2, Tier 3 kind of roles. We used group mentoring. Because there always seemed to be like at least a few leaders in the group of 10 that weren't necessarily, when I say leader, they weren't necessarily managers, but they were like just, natural leaders who would come into these peer groups and just sort of peer mentor them because they wanted help as well. So that is sort of like what had my kind of like brain juices flowing when we built group mentoring, because it was like, how can we scale super fast in some of these areas where thousands of issues are coming through in a way that makes sense. And that's when I was thinking about call centers and staffing up call centers and doing it rapidly, but still having like kind of quality and engagement from people in safe spaces. So that was the sort of inspo there.
Anything else? We have time for one more question, if anybody has one. Okay, well, thanks. We're around the conference. So you can find us if you think of a question later.
Want to clap for you?
Yes, thank you.